Welcome to this episode. This is a map of some place in what country or region would you say? China? Japan? South Korea? North Korea? Mongolia? Taiwan? Actually, none of the above. This little map is not from those regions or nations on the Asian continent. It's a map of a small region in northwestern Nigeria, in the region of a small ethnic group known as the Shang people, also called the Shanga or the Shangawa people. They number just over 30,000 today, but were once a lot more substantial in number, with earlier generations having been assimilated into the much larger ethnic groups of the region, such as the Hausa, Fulani, and Yoruba. There is increasing focus on this small ethnic group known as the Shang by researchers due to its uncanny, astonishing linguistic and physiognomical links to the founders of the great early Chinese civilization known as the Shang Empire, which ruled over China from 1600 BC to 1046 BC. That's nearly 6 centuries. If you're new to the history of African empires being established in China in antiquity, you can see our very popular video titled When Africa Colonized China on the screen link once you finish with this video, where we prove this beyond any reasonable doubt. But we'll drop some insight into that as we progress through this episode in support of that history, of course. So first off, let us establish the actual origins of the Chinese people. A recent heavy-duty international study undertaken by Chinese scientists and multinational academics has confirmed that the Chinese people did not originate from Peking man in northern China as was once believed, but rather they had originated from Negroes in East Africa. Professor Jin Li, one of China's leading geneticists, led this monumental research project with an international research team which included Russians, Indians, Brazilians, and researchers from a variety of nations. Professor Li's research was based on DNA tests held at the National Human Genome Center and the Fujian's Institute of Genetics both in Shanghai, China. Professor Li had singled out a male genetic marker that surfaced only about 80,000 years ago in Africa, which means that any man who carries this genetic marker must have recent African ancestors and cannot be a descendant of the more ancient Homo erectus. Professor Li took about 20,000 DNA samples from 160 ethnic groups across all of East Asia, and after careful analysis in his lab, came to the following conclusion. He said, "We did not see even one single individual that could be considered as a descendant of the Homo erectus in China. Rather, everybody was a descendant of our ancestors from Africa." So it has been established that the first settlers of China were black Africans who migrated there anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 years ago. By the time the Z and the Shang people arrived from West Africa around 3,000 years ago, that early population of black settlers had turned pale-skinned, lost its high melanin, and formed the majority of mainland Chinese people. Archaeology, the ancient texts, and forensic tests all confirm that China's first 2 dynasties were the Xia and the Shang, and were both black African dynasties. One Shang king was called Xuan Wang, which means black king. Xuan means black. Another Shang Dynasty king was called Xuan Niao, meaning black hawk. According to scholars, in China, an Africoid presence is visible from remote antiquity. The Shang, for example, China's first dynasts, are described as having black and oily skin. The famous Chinese sage Lao Tse was black in complexion. By the way, African presence went beyond China and into Japan and all of Asia in the ancient world. According to research, Funan is a name given by Chinese historians to the earliest kingdom of Southeast Asia. Their records expressly state that, for the complexion of men, they consider black the most beautiful. In all the kingdoms of the southern region, it is the same. The first kingdom in Vietnam was the kingdom of Lin Yi. Its inhabitants possessed black skin, eyes deep in the orbit, nose turned up, hair frizzy at a period when they were not yet subject to foreign domination, and preserved the purity of this type. The fate of the black kingdoms and the black people of Far East Asia must be tied to increased pressure from non-Africoid peoples pushing down from Northern Asia, according to scholars. In the ethnology of the Japanese race, the writer Reverend Bodhi attempted to document what he considered a prominent and indelible African strain running through early Japanese history, and that the Japanese people are at least in part Asian Negroes. Referencing the work of pioneer ethnologists and anthropologists James Cowles Pritchard, Reverend Bodhi wrote that they're also described as having peculiar features, crisp hair, and dark complexion. Besides their Negro features, which are very observable, the early Japanese historians themselves have described for us the black barbarians of the South, who in an age which antedates authentic history came from the South in ships and settled in Japan. These immigrants mingled and amalgamated one with another and with the natives, and in time became a homogeneous race whose predominating physical characteristics bespeak the unmistakable presence of a large Negro element. The LA Times also notes in a scientific report that populations from East Asia always derived from a single lineage, indicating the single origins of those populations. It is now probably safe to conclude that modern humans originating in Africa constitute the majority of the current gene pool in East Asia. As for the African presence in early China, there is evidence of substantial populations of an African substratum in the earliest periods of Chinese history, and reports of major kingdoms ruled by Africans are frequent in Chinese documents. The Shang Dynasts of ancient China are described as having black and oily skin. According to Chinese professor Shun Ling, the earliest documented rulers in China were referred to as Zuandi, a phrase that translates to Black Emperor. The Z dynasty is regarded as the first Chinese dynasty, but there's a lack of documentation about this dynasty, and therefore precious little is known about the Z period. But we do know that there were black Africans and were ethnically related to the Shang who succeeded them. More on that later. The Shang Dynasty is the earliest recorded Chinese dynasty supported by archaeological evidence. 31 Shang kings in total ruled much of the area along the Yellow River. Under the Shang Dynasty, there were advances in maths, astronomy, art, and military technology. They used a highly developed calendar system and an early form of modern Chinese language, according to Leonie Xiaofeng. The capital city of the Shang Dynasty was named Anyang, and incidentally, there is a region today named Anyang in Nigeria, and many people are given the name Anyang at birth. It's a name that is extremely common among groups there who share cultural ties with the Shang of Nigeria. Anyang became the capital of the Shang Dynasty around 1300 BC under King Pangeng. Anyang is believed to be the city that Shang kings ruled from for more than 2 centuries, with altars, temples, and palaces located at the center. Surrounding the political center were artisans comprising an industrial area of stone carvers, bronze workers, potters, and others, and then small housing structures. So how does all this information relate to the small numbered Shang tribe of Nigeria? Well, for starters, they share the same name, Shang. There's only one ethnic group known as the Shang in all of Africa, and it's them, this little tribe of 30,000 in northwestern Nigeria. They also share uncanny similarities with the Chinese Shang. 3,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Shang lived in the region just below the Nile Valley, from where they were gradually forced to flee southwards with the increased desertification of the Sahara, as well as by foreign invasions by Muslim Arabs. We believe that the ancestors of the Shang people migrated out of Africa from this point somewhere before 1600 BC and established themselves in China and began the dynasty known as the Shang Dynasty of China and ruled over that nation for 600 years. In African cultures, to be the traditional ruler of an ethnic group, your lineage must lead directly to the ancient founders of that group. And here, we see the traditional ruler of the Shang people today. Interesting look, wouldn't you say? Here are a few names of the districts in the land of the Shang people of Nigeria, in their local government area as it's called, similar to a county. Basically, these are the districts of the county of the Shang people of Nigeria. And we have names like Takwari, Sawashi, Kawara, Hundeji, Bunkuji, Zariawa, Bandakwai. So, if the Shang people of Nigeria are the descendants of the founders of the Shang dynasty, which ruled China for 600 years, we should expect to see some elements of Nigerian Shang vocabulary in the modern Chinese language of Mandarin today, shouldn't we? Well, we've done the research on that, and it's based on primary research conducted by Roger Blench, Chief Research Officer at the K. Williamson Educational Foundation, a very strong researcher into the Shang people of Nigeria. So there should be words which the Shang ethnic group of Nigeria speak today that ought to be similar, in fact the same, as the Mandarin Chinese, especially because researchers state that the Shang dynasty spoke an old form of the modern Chinese language. So as far as word similarities, here's what we found. Oh, by the way, please note that in the following words, we've included not just the spelling of the words in Chinese, but also the pronunciation as provided by an online Chinese language platform which we reference below. So let's have a bit of fun here and check out the linguistic connections between the Shang language of Nigeria and modern-day Mandarin Chinese. Number 1, yini, yi. Number 9, kudabuk, ku. Husband, zan, zan. Beard, zu, zu. Wind, seng, feng. Love, xin, shi. See, a lot of these Chinese words are confusing when written in English. Maybe someone's trying to hide something, but words like she, S-H-E, are spelled as X-I, and so on. And you don't really know what X-I is supposed to sound like, but luckily we have a Chinese platform where the pronunciation audio is attached to each Chinese word, so we know what they sound like when pronounced. We have included such words here and their pronunciation. Now, according to linguistic experts, when two different regions share many basic everyday words like come, go, stand, sit, stop, and so on, it is evidence that they once lived together in the same place because those basic words seldom change even after thousands of years. More complex words are altered or replaced through the passage of time and by interaction with other groups, but the basic words stay the same or very close to the same right through millennia. So here goes. Floor, debe, dibber. Meat, nam, nan. Drink, hua, hua. Water, shir, shir. Power, zi, shi. Shame, za, sha. Arrive, ba, ha. Sit down, shisha, shisha. Arrive, ba, bo. Arm, book, bo. Wisdom, she. Sing, bom, hum. Knife, shun, shun. Well, ju, jim. Weave, huen, chi. Now, what are the chances that a small, diminishing remote tribe of 30,000 in rural Nigeria would coincidentally share the same unusual, complicated term for clothes weaving with Mandarin China? But we carry on. Leaves, ajang, jang. Chest, jan, jan. Cold, doi, do. Bone, ku, gu. Hippopotamus, hem, hema. Sock, ham, han. Owl, ju, ju. Go, jungo, jun. Climb, kaye, paye. Star, je. Hold, ban, ba. Spear, ban, pian. Build, shan, jan. Vagina, she, ji. Ask, fen, fen. Wash, jibi, jibi. Road, gavia, gavia. Return, gori, goi. Drum, gugong, huntong. Yawn, hari, ha. Farm, chang, non-chang. Smooth, huari, hua. Sharp, ji. Throat, jukton, hulong. We, re, warain. Forest, sek, sen. Forehead, sheng, san. Spit, tang, to tang. To drop, tang shi. Neck, tongue, thaw. 5, 2, woo. Stranger, sen, sheng ren. Fire, ya, yeah. Cat, paduma, pahuma. To tie, shishe, shi. Shadow, sing zing, ying zi. Moon, fei, ye. Tight, vin, yin. To load, za, zai. To close, jibin, guanbi. To lock, jaban, guanjin. To cook, sak, sham. Room, zu, wu. Begin, kas, kash. Open, gan, kan. Push, tui. Respect, zam. Cough, kem, ke. Rest, tuin, tu. Vomit, kpe, ke. Wipe, sis, she. Walk, zizi, zi. Catch, do. Clay, bi, ni. Firewood, kuko. Kia. Tooth, zi, she. Cloth, kupit, bupi. Pestle, migis, ningi. Arrow, ji, she. Stool, jeset, jesawe. Fence, tam, tan. One, si, seer, bamboo, huang. A particular word that interests us here at the African History Station is egusi. It's a traditional West African dish made with melon seeds and usually eaten with fufu. According to Wiki, egusi soup is prepared with melon seeds and eaten by most ethnic groups in Nigeria in many different ways. It is known as miyan gushi in Hausa, ofe egusi in Igbo, and efo elegusi in Yoruba languages. Melon seeds are also called agusi in the small Shang tribe of 30,000. And as far away as Ghana, agusi is also the name for the seeds of the melon fruit found across West Africa. Now I know what some of you are thinking at this point. You're thinking, you're not going to tell us they call it the same thing in China, are you? Well, actually, let's show you the screen from the Chinese language website referred to earlier, just so you can see it for yourself. Because like they say, seeing is believing. And what is the Mandarin Chinese name for melon seeds? You guessed it, gusi. Phew. And now it's time to hear them speak. We have some audio recording of the Hiem language of Nigeria, which is the parent language of the Zi and Shang. Remember, the Shang is derived from the Zi language, as testified by the Shang people. They are all subgroups of the Hiem language, which is roughly 300,000 speakers in total today. The various subgroups like Shang, Zi, Khoi, Mwagavu, and one called Jaba, sounds eerily like Japan, are really just dialects of the Hiem language. According to research, the first mention of Zi appears in Cole's Polyglotta Africana, in which he mentions that a language other than Hiem is spoken in the villages of Fai, Fukoi, that's Fogyang, and Fungo. Kwasao conducted research on the Zi language. Blench presents a word list collected from Shang, a previously unrecorded Hiemic language. He states that traditions and lexical similarities indicate that it is related to Zi. So let's listen to this Hiem language, the parent language of the Zi and the Shang. See what it sounds like.
Shilshin shok fari di chafari. Kate chang chafari. Jesu tam da kate chang chafari kushu. Kate shaharo ka kate shawiro. Yomono kuziziri ho kate shaharo. Lanu Jesu tang di hira. Zamba yor kate shawiro. Kayi kuruponyi kajiri garnom di fongoro. Beme monogo hiraro wo hyonsenyang chikia kurisu dariko dinang heri hwabi yor kate shaharo ko shwa dor kate.
Again, are you thinking what we're thinking? So what we've posited here is that in very remote times, a large number of the Zi people, then based in the northwestern Sahel of West Africa, made their way out of the continent and headed eastwards to Asia. The Sahara's desertification probably led to a debate within the group over whether to head east or south. Some chose to go south, and some, perhaps a larger group, decided to head east, which ultimately led them out of Africa. The Zi nobles established the first dynasty known as the Zi Dynasty. Interestingly, although it's spelled Xia, the actual pronunciation is Zi. So the Zi Dynasty ruled for centuries, and then the last emperor named Ji was a tyrant, reportedly, and this made a subsection of the Zi group, the Shang, decide to overthrow him. This began the Shang Dynasty, which ruled over China from 1600 BC to 1046 BC. There's also another subgroup of the Hiem language called the Mwagavu. They display an astonishing similarity to the Chinese language to the point that scholars have actually noticed. As noted by one of them, the Mwagavu people also share a lot of attributes with some of the Asian groups, particularly the Chinese, Japanese, and the Koreans. This can be seen in the accent, intonation, pronunciation, naming of places and people. A lot of other tribes outside often cajole the Mwagavu people as the Chinese due to their synonymic way of naming people, functions, and ways of communication. Namfuang, a Mwagavu student in Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria, Nigeria, was playfully teased by his lecturer in a course titled Comparative Administration and Governance of Countries to write on China due to the synonymic nature of his name to the Chinese, both in terms of spellings and pronunciation. He was asked to create a relationship between the two groups, and at the end, he created good semblances. The Chinese use a lot of wordings with the same spelling and pronunciation with the Mwagavu people. Good examples of them are Nantong, Nanking, Nanqing, Namfuang, Nanchang, Nankin, Nanta, Qing, Nankin, Nanji, Yen, Ninan, Talang, Pil, Tarieng, Taweng, Pan, Nabam, Katbam, Nigerian, and Nandong, among others. These words rhyme in their mode of pronunciation and also in the way they are being spelled. The Mangavul people named people after such names, but the Chinese named not only people but events, equipment, and natural features such as mountains, valleys, and natural rivers. In attributes such as humane nature, passion for learning, adventure, chastity, brotherliness, communalism, and other issues of morality of the two groups are alike. In summary, the nouns tally and also rhyme with the way they are being pronounced. What needs to be verified are the verbs. Mian or Yao is a group of related languages spoken by the Yao people, a Bantu group in Malawi, and Mozambique and Tanzania. They are also called Wayao. They speak the same thing in terms of nouns and verbs with the Mian tribal group of China today. If the Yao can trace their origin of their language from China with sufficient facts, what will then stop the Mangavul Man and other tribes or related groups from the Niger-Congo family from doing the same, since they shared a lot of wordings and pronunciations in common and in practice? Bali is spoken in Indonesia and at the same time in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and so also is Sotho, which is spoken in Lesotho, South Africa, and Botswana. Sometime in the 13th century BCE, the Shang kings abandoned their settlement north of the Huan River in Anyang and founded a new capital in its southern banks. Here they built palaces and temples in a city that became one of the largest urban centers of the ancient world. The ancestors of the Shang had a writing system similar to the hieroglyphs of their nearby neighbors in Nubia and Kemet and took that with them to China. This explains the similarity between Chinese and African hieroglyphs, which are both non-alphabetical but logographic, with meaning read into the symbols. Just before we leave, we'll talk about hats. The hundreds of ethnic groups across West Africa wear a variety of traditional headgear. But the Shang, at least the ones that have not been assimilated by surrounding Islam, as well as the Mwanjavu and others of the Yamic language group, uniquely wear this traditional hat. Where else have we seen the mass use of this style of hat? Phew. In conclusion, we believe that there's more than enough evidence to warrant a thorough investigation of what appear to be clear connections between the Xia and Shang dynasties of China and the Xi and Shang people of Nigeria in West Africa. It will be amazing to see what large-scale DNA testing and studies would reveal. But here at the African History Station, we strongly believe that there is a there. Thanks for watching this episode. Do remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and look out for the next one on Africa's great civilizations.
Shilshin shop fali di chafali kate chang chafali Jesu tam da kate chang chafali kushu kate shaharo